Alrighty. So hi, everybody. So I wanted to suggest that we all, as a matter of inclusion, it's a practice that I do on my community calls. I'd like to invite all of you to add your pronouns to your name in Zoom. So you can actually mouse over your name and right click or click on the blue box and it says rename. And you can add your pronouns, which are likely she, her, hers, or he, him, his, or they, them, and theirs. And if you aren't sure what I'm talking about, there's a lot online about pronouns as a way that people want to be addressed and would like to be addressed. And it's a way for us to show our allyship, particularly if we are in the community that identifies as cisgender. So maybe if we have time, I'll go into that in a little bit. But I'm really happy to be here with this community. It's been an incredible collaboration putting this together, and to get to have almost 300 of you here today is such an honor. I'm just really grateful to be asked right now for my thoughts and to be able to teach some frameworks that we work with in our consulting work and for organizations around inclusion, intersectionality, covering behaviors, and allyship. So that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. And then we're going to have ample time to do Q&A. So what I would ask all of you to do is please feel free to chat in who you are and where you're calling in from. And also, as we go, please ask questions about any of the topics that I'm bringing up. I want you all to know, as much as we can create a safe space with so many people on, I still always want to say that there is no question not worth asking. And also a lot of feelings that you might want to share, that this is a place you can share them in. I'd be happy to, and I know I speak for everyone, to say, these are intense times, and let's share and lean on each other, because we're not alone in doing this work. And I know we all share that passion for change. And so let me tell a little bit about my story. I had the good fortune to move to New York City, which is where I still call home, to study opera and get my degree in operatic vocal performance. And I wanted to be a star, of course. Is what you want when you come to New York, to do that. But sadly, through the course of operatic training, I injured my voice. And some of you might have heard this on an earlier call who were able to join us. And I had to get vocal surgery. So that was difficult. I was, felt I was never going to be able to use my voice again. And really, you are deprived of the stamina you need to do 8 shows a week and for weeks and months on end. And so I knew that I would need to reinvent myself professionally. And so I luckily found my way to the field of training, because the stage was such a comfortable place for me. And that led to HR and led to organizational change. And I got another degree in that discipline. And today, then I would subsequently become an entrepreneur. And today I get to help organizations build more inclusive workplaces where all kinds of talent can feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. And so I like to say I was meant to use my voice, just not as a singer. But the other way I wasn't using my voice that I always share is that I was closeted as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I came out when I was 22, but as a performer and then subsequently as a business owner, I was very concerned that people would judge me before knowing the truth about who I am, before I even signed that contract. I was worried that I wouldn't be given the credibility and be assigned the expertise that I had worked so hard to have, and that it would somehow impact me from a stigma perspective. And so that was an interesting data point for me. And I have to say, I still wrestle with that, even though I'm very proudly an out entrepreneur. There are rooms I find myself in where I am anticipating that I may need to adjust what I share, my actions, my behaviors, how I express myself, to sort of counteract my anticipation of how people are going to respond to some of my identities. So that is heartbreaking, and also distracting and exhausting and fatiguing. And realizing that so many of us feel that way on a day-to-day basis in the workplace led me to find this work on covering, which is the next slide. And this is work actually that I really hold dear. And I think, let's go to the next slide when we have a moment. I'm going to explain to you all what covering means as defined by this piece that was done by Deloitte and Kenji Yoshino and Christy Smith. And it is the concept of downplaying a known stigmatized identity. So it is the way that we play small in anticipation of not getting a fair shot, right? So we quickly assess and are reminded of our status in organizations when we are one of an underrepresented group, or I might use the word underestimated, which I also like. Whenever you are an only and lonely, which I also say, we are constantly doing the math about how we're going to be heard and what we can bring. When we say bring our full selves to work, it is relatively more difficult for some of us than others to do that. And so I have felt this concept as it applies to me when I walk into rooms and I make assumptions, by the way, about who I see in that room. Is there going to be a receptivity to me, to all of me? And so covering is exhausting. I think I think works on us in a subconscious way in terms of making us actually feel less competent. And that is very insidious, obviously, in addition to everything else I've said. And so many of us do it. So this is the other thing that I think is what I try to do when we talk about inclusion and diversity is try to make it a universal experience, something that we all can relate to in some way, even though our experiences are obviously very different. The ability to know who's covering in the workplace and all the ways that they're covering is a powerful way of unifying us around sort of a common challenge that we want to overcome. And so on the next slide, it shows how many of us are covering and around what sort of dimensions. And by the way, I want to remind everybody, please text in your questions and in chat if you want, or comments, or I'd love to know how you cover and what you cover around. Perhaps today, because of everything that's going on, I think covering behaviors have probably changed. They had already changed in the COVID work from home world, where we were all looking at each other through video screens, right? And I think that had some interesting impacts on covering. But I think now with the Black Lives Movement being so present for us, I do wonder too whether this dynamic has shifted. So something to think about. So the concept is, is 61% of us report doing this along one of these axes. And I just want to focus perhaps on the Black experience for 1 minute and all that I've learned as somebody who is an aspiring ally myself, my own learning journey. And the research actually talks about how Black individuals in workplaces feel they need to dress a certain way or wear their hair a certain way. If you see role models, and you don't see a lot of role models, but the ones you do see behave in a certain way, I think those of us, that's all we have to really gauge how we're expected to show up in workplaces. And, that's not representative of the diversity of each diverse community, we know, but so we adjust our appearance. Maybe we dress more formally. I know Michelle Obama, I remember that advice. She said, that children get in the Black community, we've got to be extra. We've got to be extra perfect. We've got to be extra on our game, and so this is the exhaustion piece, I feel. And particularly with the last couple of weeks, I'm so mindful of the difficulty of bringing your full self to work in a workplace that may not be talking about what's going on, may not be leaders that may not share, companies that aren't taking a stand, microaggressions and macroaggressions that continue to be sort of permeate the organization without accountability. So I think that the covering behaviors now are like, can I fall apart? Can I not be, am I allowed to be emotional? Can I talk about what's happening in my community? Can I be open with that? When I'm expected to show up to work and be like, nothing is happening. How realistic is that to ask me? And how I would argue, how fair is that? Like, does that really create a culture of belonging where everyone can thrive when we ask people to leave so much of themselves at the door? Absolutely. And thank you. I'm seeing some comments and you all are resonating. Yes, you're all resonating with this. Affiliation-based covering is wanting to distance ourselves from a stigmatized group, not be affiliated. Advocacy is not wanting to always be the one that speaks up about comments and jokes and practices because we sense that, I'm going to be viewed as the angry fill in the blank, right? when we're just literally trying to give feedback so people can learn and so we can thrive. But advocacy-based covering means that you just stop using your voice because you sense that it's going to be harmful for you. And then association-based covering is very similar to affiliation, but it's that distancing from sort of being seen, quote unquote. And this was interesting in the physical workplace. This was done a couple of years ago. So this was being seen with too many people that identify as you do, and then having it alleged that you favor people from your background. And so, I don't know this, I think this research is still very relevant, but it's interesting to see it through the lens of COVID and now the Black Lives Movement, and really relating this to, how are we experiencing bringing our full selves to work right now? I think that there's been something that's unleashed in terms of truth telling. And I hope that not just Black colleagues finding their voice, but so many of us that haven't had a voice in the workplace, now is our time. And there is a sensitivity that now, and a receptivity, and a hope and openness to change, that we've got to, prop that door open and keep it open for a while. This cannot be a flash in the pan, and it can't be a momentary, it's not a movement, it's a movement. All these things that we're hearing, we've got to, particularly when I say we, I mean allies, we've got to prop that door open and keep our foot in that door and keep it open so that we can make sure that the right change happens from all that we're learning and being shown right now. So on the next slide, this is always that kind of powerful moment when I present this in my keynotes, because the research in Deloitte's piece covers straight white men as well. And so 45% of straight white men reported covering in the research. And it's interesting because you might look at a group like this and say, well, what do they know about diversity? It's just a lot of invisible aspects. And, I have to check myself and make sure I'm walking the talk about inclusion. And as I look at a group like this, I say, there's a lot I don't know about people and their personal challenges, how they grew up, what their political affiliation, their religion. I've had Jewish executives say on Christian management teams not talk about their faith and realize they were covering. There are probably a lot of covering behaviors amongst allies. So I also think that's really interesting to think about, how can we normalize allyship in a group that looks like this, where I know that people, they do know something about diversity. They have a diversity story. It may not be the same story as all of us, but they have so much leadership to show and to demonstrate that would mean so much to so many people. And I think these kinds of leaders are the most, ill-equipped right now to lead at this moment, because the grounds are shifting under us so much, and so many white folks are not equipped or competent in understanding why all this is happening, what to do, what to say, the fear of doing things imperfectly, and not having the answers is something that I think is particularly challenging for leaders right now. So I had someone on a call I did recently say, let's have some empathy for leaders right now. And I felt that because it's a new lexicon, and it requires, in many ways, kind of the opposite of what leaders have been told has been needed and rewarded, right? It's knowing all the answers. It's being unassailable. It's being confident and, guiding people. And I guess, having that expertise, and none of that is, it's not that it's not relevant right now, but there's so much of this other side of leading that's coming to the fore right now that people really want to see and hear, and really need to hear right now. So great. And then I'm going to do one more concept, and then I'm going to hand it back to the team. Thinking about this as then an iceberg of identity, 10% of us is visible, or, we show anyway, or we don't hide. And then there's a lot underneath our icebergs, right? There's everything from being neurodiverse to our true gender identity, to, our, if we're mixed race and we pass as white, on a regular basis. I would argue ethnicity can be under the waterline. Being LGBTQ, I'll tell you all that 50% of us are still closeted in the workplace. So 50. And many of my friends that work for very progressive companies are still closeted, because we all know the power of our direct managers over over how comfortable we feel and how trusting we feel in our institutions. And sometimes, you know, very progressive companies, that doesn't trickle down to the middle management layer. And, you know, we exist, you know, in partnership with our direct boss. You know, we all know that the statistic, people leave managers, not companies and not jobs. So we still have a lot of work to do in that. But I think thinking about the iceberg in this moment of truth telling and, you know, reckoning that we're in, we need to lower this waterline once and for all. We need to bring more of ourselves to work. We need to create a safe space for us to do that and be honest. And we need our leaders to lower their waterline about all that they don't know right now, so that we can have an honest conversation, in many cases for the first time, about how so many of us have been laboring in these systems not built by and for us, and what would make these systems places where we could thrive and feel that sense of belonging, from which we do our best work. And so with that, I will pause and hand it back to you, Shay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Brown here, founder and CEO of Jennifer Brown Consulting, and diversity, equity, and inclusion speaker, author, passionate advocate. And I'm so honored to be joined today by John, Allison, and Sandra for a conversation about leading in these challenging times and communicating a message of inclusiveness that is so important, especially right now, but I think we would all agree has always been a really pressing and important issue in the world of business, nonprofits, advocacy, any kind of organization of any size. This is a conversation and a topic that means so much to employees everywhere. And is something that proves challenging sometimes, and especially now, to add a sense of urgency to it that is appropriate and needed. And so I'm really excited to especially dive in today to the question of executive leaders and the voice that leaders use and need to use during these times in order to motivate action, to identify opportunities for growth, and to be congruent in our own leadership with what the moment needs and what people need to hear from us. And so this is going to be a really rich conversation, and I'm so looking forward to it. And so welcome to the three of you. And I would love to start, because I think it's important. We want to know who you are and why this topic has always been important to you, how you've walked this path of inclusiveness personally. And before we get into our roles as leaders. And so, Sandra, I'd love to start with you and hear what you consider to be your diversity story, and how you've kind of come to the passion you have for this work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Jennifer, for leading this discussion. And I'm so glad to be here with Allison and John to just have a quality conversation today, a courageous conversation. And hopefully we'll be able to move to some courageous actions at the end. So for me, I think, I think a lot of people would probably look at me and say, gosh, you're African-American female at that. And so diversity should be who you are and what you live every day. But I don't think you are born thinking that way. I think we're all sort of born and you grow up. And I grew up in a small town in Mississippi. I did go to a school that had all kinds of students. I had Black friends, I had white friends, but I will tell you that on the weekends, I didn't see any white people. I lived in a neighborhood that was predominantly Black. I shopped at stores that were in my neighborhood. I went out with my Black friends, and then on Monday, life was integrated again. And so for me, that was normal. And I think for many of us, we tend to just live that way, where we think this is normal. And I will tell you that throughout my life, I think I've always had experiences that were around diversity, which is really sort of the representation piece of it, of what people can see about me. And then inclusion, where maybe I didn't feel as included or left out, but really couldn't understand it. And sometimes you think it's you're flawed, you've done something wrong, or you're not quite the right fit. But I think for me, it all culminated when I had my child. I had a Black baby boy, and I began to see the world a little differently, because I had to understand that there were some things I had to reckon with in order to raise him. And I realized that I was raising him in a really different world that I had grew up in. And I needed to be able to be honest with him. But it was hard. And I needed to realize some things and really reckon with what truth was and who we are as people. And I would say that that really has emboldened me and really created for me a sense of awareness around how important it is to speak up and speak out and be authentic and be real. But at the same time, although that can be exhausting, to remain hopeful throughout the entire thought around diversity and inclusion and what we're all striving for, which is equality for all.
Sandra, thank you for sharing that. We're going to come back to some of the themes you mentioned around, you mentioned code switching on Monday morning, right? Code switching is a concept of shifting how we show up, and in order to kind of tread carefully in terms of our own cultures, our own identities. I know as an LGBTQ person, and I've been out since my early 20s, the switching we make on a Monday has to do with our loved ones, our families, what we did over the weekend, the cultural references we use, the reality of being closeted. And so there are some, in Pride Month, especially with everything that's going on, there are some fascinating and really important connections to talk about around the fact that a lot of us don't feel comfortable bringing our full selves to work. And that's fundamentally what we're talking about, and what the crisis, I think, is about right now, is that we are overdue for all of this work. And we've been, if we had been paying attention, we would be hearing what has been true for so many people. And yet organizations and institutions are now there's a great understanding that's unfolding. So, I'm optimistic as much as I'm heartbroken right now about what's going on, but it's so necessary. So Sandra, thank you for telling us about your family and your moment and your aha and your need to step forward and be more explicit and more overt in how you're doing this work and showing up, because I know you've made a difference. I know that, and that's such an important quality of leadership. Thank you. And it's exhausting. It is. So thank you. And we'll get to all of that. Allison, tell us about your journey. And I know you actually also led diversity and inclusion work for many years, also in a previous institution. So
I think I'm proof, Jennifer, that you can't really make assumptions based on what people look like. I'm a very white, freckle-faced kid from Enid, Oklahoma, growing up, and yet my earliest memories, my dad was in the public health service and a doctor during the Vietnam War, and we ended up living on a San Carlos Indian reservation, and my earliest memories were being different. And then I realized as I got older that I had a very unique perspective, because, in the cowboy and Indian movies that we watched as little kids, we would, la, 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 we would yell for the Indians and for the what we refer to as Native Americans now. But as a little kid, I realized I had different perspectives. And then I had the blessing of being annoying to my mother, because she had 4 kids and I was the oldest. And so she would drop me off at the library when I was in 4th grade and tell me just to go away and read. And so for whatever reason, I loved autobiographies and I loved learning. And I remember reading biographies and autobiographies about Martin Luther King and Clara Barton. And, I remember watching on TV as a small child, Roots and autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and learning that way, and became a little bit of an autodidact on this topic. And then when I went to OSU, I just ended up with a focus and a passion for civil rights that started really, honestly, my master's thesis was in the way women speak and subjugated texts, and to get our point across. But then I evolved into LGBTQ rights, civil rights, and then realized that none of us, until all of us are treated fairly, none of us can stop, And so I recognized that ally behavior. And throughout my career, then I had the honor when I was at Williams of working with leaders like Michael Johnson, who was an amazing African-American leader, in corporate America throughout his career, and Keith Bailey, who was as a CEO in the 90s, really began the work on diversity at Williams in the 90s. And then I became the opportunity to take that official career move in 2003 to lead our diversity and inclusion efforts. Just briefly, I'll share that in 2003, we added sexual orientation to the non-discrimination policy. And those of us that were working on that got hundreds of angry emails. But by the time in 2008, when we added domestic partner benefits, it was a blip on the radar. So that gives me hope. And hope is so important, because I tell you what, those 5 years between adding sexual orientation to the non-discrimination policy and getting domestic partner benefits, when we got domestic partner benefits, I wept. I felt like I had just given birth to a 5-year gestational baby. I mean, it took so long. And yet, by the time that happened, everybody was like, that's fine. By that person getting what I already have, I don't lose anything. You know, the perception had shifted. And so, you know, now I realized and recognized the critical importance of ally behavior and why we all have to be in this together. And then, you know, now I'm at the United Way. And our mission at the United Way is to unite people and resources to improve lives and strengthen communities. So, I mean, what a privilege to wake up every day and get to live that mission. And that's where I am right now. And so I'm just honored to be. I know the other two panelists and getting to know you, and we're just honored to be here. It's a rough time and a hard time, and we've cried a lot over these past couple of weeks. And even before, when this was scheduled, we were talking about COVID, you know, and I'm hoping that we can bring the lessons together for more innovation and more creative change than we've ever had before. Thank you.
Second that. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. So much of our diversities are not visible. And that's why I always try to start with our diversity stories and invite the sharing and check my own assumptions about who I think is sitting across from me. And that's so beautiful, Allison, that your journey took you to all those places and you were that curious kid and you felt called to action. And now you've become this activated ally and this voice. And we'll talk about allyship in a bit, because right now the learning for allies is deep and rich, and the opportunity and the need, the just pressing need for all of us to do more and to be more overt, more intentional, more consistent, more brave is right in front of us. And I think that this is the piece we've been missing in terms of organizational change. We've had folks who are impacted the most doing the most work in terms of the heavy lifting of change. And I see that change. I agree with you, Allison. I think we may look back at this moment, just like your example of what can shift, and we'll say we finally started having this real conversation, and look what has happened subsequently. But we need to be part of, my favorite quote is, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We have to bend the arc. It is now. And it has been true, but I think now we must, all of us must bend it. And so we have to figure out what that means for each of us as people, as leaders, but no doubt our efforts are needed. Okay, thank you so much, John. So same question, what would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I think, and you kind of started off initially when we first started talking about leadership and leadership qualities, and so I think the ability for good leaders to be a little introspective, to kind of look at the decisions they've made, and the way they think about topics, and the ability to be able to morph and change as things change around you, I think is very important. And so I would say, as it relates to this topic on inclusion and diversity, I'm a different person today than I was, even 10 years ago. And so, you go back and look, so I grew up in Pittsburgh in a middle-class family, hardworking parents, obviously Caucasian, white Caucasian family. And, didn't go to high school with a very diverse group of people. Everybody was white. And then spent a big chunk of my life just working, right? So just get my career ahead and work hard and do those things, because that's kind of how I was brought up. And at some point, as I started to have success in my in my career, actually my sister made a comment to me that I was lucky because I had white privilege. And I didn't even know what that meant, right? So initially I was like really offended because I was like, no one handed me anything. I worked my butt off to get where I am. And so that gave me the opportunity to start thinking about, after I calmed down, I started thinking about what that really meant in relation to a variety of other, races and genders and gender identification and disabled. I mean, just everybody you can put into that bucket. And I think so that was sort of initially sort of a bit of an awakening for me. And as I started, really thinking through that, and then so I lived in Tulsa before I get to that. So the other thing probably, which was a big awakening for me, is our kids are in their late 20s. My daughter just turned 30. And at some point in high school, neither one of them were really dating. And my wife and I got in this conversation about, well, what if our kids are gay? And what it finally came down to was it didn't matter, right? It wasn't going to change how much we loved them or not. The only thing that was important was that were they happy, right? If they were happy people and the people that they were with were good to them, then that's kind of really what was important. And so that's another one for me, was another sort of a groundbreaking moment to me that, we need to have a much more open heart and mind about the diversity in our society, and that people are people, and everybody needs to be treated equally. And so move forward in time, I end up here in Tulsa almost 10 years ago. And in my role here as a CEO of a public company, I get access to a lot of people, a lot of thoughts. Been actively involved in the charitable community here in Tulsa. And so it's been such a huge learning experience for me. And it's been the whole inclusion and diversity thing for me is like the last 3 to 5 years has been like going through a tunnel. And so it's like I've blasted out of the end of that tunnel, and I'm a different person today on all those topics. I'm definitely not an expert in any of it. And we as an organization are trying to get our hands around what's the best way for us to be action oriented, to make an impact. And so today, kind of where I'm at is, I spent the last 9 years here in Tulsa trying to do things in the charitable community, trying to make an impact. And so after I joined the CEO Action Network, I went through the MARC event that the Chamber put on in December. For me, it's like, okay, I've got the biggest, in my position, the biggest opportunity to make an impact in society is on this issue, on inclusion and diversity. That I can, my platform can make the changes I need in our organization and make the changes that I need in our communities that we work and across the country. So for my small little piece, when I move on into retirement, I've made some kind of an impact on inclusion and diversity. And then you get specifically, so I'm talking a lot here, but you get specifically into the whole race thing. And I think that, I heard Brian Stevenson speak at the CEO Action event last fall. And again, that was a groundbreaking event for me about racism in America, and that it's absolutely there. And that, all we've done is sort of covered it up and done a feel-good thing, but we haven't, I don't think as a society, have really dealt with that issue. And so what's going on today over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I think we've pulled the covers off. I think we need to leave the covers off. We need to do something about it and take some action. So anyway,
That's
I'll
right.
stop talking.
No, thank you, John. You're right. We got to stay in the discomfort long enough for change to happen. And
Right.
I know there's a bias in the business world of take action, let's do something. And then I'm always counseling senior leaders to say, but you do something, but have you been doing the work behind the scenes? How, if you do something and you get scrutinized then for what your board looks like, what your executive team looks like, how your workplace practices, do you have a good story and a reality to talk about in terms of how you've been on the path? And so this isn't a quick fix, and it's not something that you can just jump on into the stream. You have to have earned this. And, companies have a lot of catching up to do. So I'm really happy, though, you're role modeling leaders that look like you, speaking that transparently, have a lot to do with change. Because if you normalize it, John, there's many that are looking to you to say, well, if he does it, I can do it. And I think those of us on the call, we really appreciate how transparent you are about your own journey, things you're not getting right, things you don't know the answer to, even just being that bold about and honest is something we wish, I think, more leaders did, because we got to just acknowledge that we could have done more, and all of us can do more. And it's not a weakness to admit that; it's actually a strength. And so thank you for sharing today. Sure. And I guess let's jump off on that with Allison and Sandra, thinking about John's leadership and thinking about senior leaders and yourself on the journey. So I know, Sandra, you're a D&I leader, so you're basically in this large institution, encouraging leaders to step forward and lead at this time. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions and confusion and hesitation around, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I want to support, what do I do? And I wondered, what is your best advice right now for the many, many people who feel activated finally, which I'm excited about, but it's probably leading to really long days and nights for you. And at a time when I know probably personally you're very devastated. So that can lead to some dangerous fatigue, and we need to be conscious of that. So, but really, how are you filling in the blanks for leaders right now and taking advantage of this moment, because it is a moment so ripe with possibility for individual change for people, but also for an institution to hear leaders leading in a resonant way right now. And I think it's such an unfamiliar thing for a lot of people. So I know that there's a lot in that. Take that wherever you'd like to go.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And that's certainly something that I think we're all grappling with. And so like John said, I don't know all the answers. So there are really 3 areas that I would counsel leaders on right now. And number 1, break the silence and reach out and engage your teams. That's the first thing. And when you're breaking that silence, you want to be intentional. You want to check your own biases. You want to know the issues. You also don't want to be silent, to say nothing. And I think we heard this from, I think it was the DA who said to say nothing is complicit. Silence is complicit. And so you also want to set the stage by being empathetic and authentic. And then you want to ask, for help and follow up. So that's the first thing that I would say is break the silence, reach out and engage your teams. The second thing is to be aware of your teammates may not be ready. Some may not be ready to have the conversation. And so just recognizing that there's a range of emotions that are at play. They may not feel safe or ready to have the conversation. And when you open the dialogue, don't feel pressure to fill the silence, right? And approach all of your conversations with some sincerity, compassion, and empathy. So that's the second thing that I would say. And then the third area is it's okay if you don't have the answers. And that's what John said. Listen, I don't have the answers, and no one expects you to, right? I think the first thing that I recognize being an African-American person first, and being a female as well, is that it is okay that you have not had my experience, that I have to leave some space for grace for that. I think the most important thing is number 1, I recognize that you may not have had my experience, but number 2, you have to recognize that my experience exists. So there is that understanding on both ends. And so it's okay if you don't have all the answers. Be who you are, be honest about where you are, ask for help, and then use resources, as I said earlier, to educate yourself, but don't make assumptions. Just ask lots of questions. So I would say that's my advice. Thank you.
That's great advice. And I would say, remember too, there's something we talk about a lot in our field, which is the emotional labor. We don't want to cause more labor right now. And we don't want to ask others to educate us about something that we can Google, something that we can watch and learn and read and listen to and choose certain media. And, Allison talked about reading books and how it enriched her. But we've got to do more work than we've been doing in the past around learning about different people's experiences and believing them the first time. Really important. And this goes for all of us in leadership roles that, you know, if you've been paying attention, you would have heard a lot of this that's coming out right now. You would have heard it, but most organizations are really uncomfortable, really truly welcoming the full person to work. When we say bring your full self to work, I always say that's more difficult for some of us than others. And there hasn't been, I think, an acknowledgement of that. And to me, that's the essence of privilege, right? Is that if the workplace is a comfortable place for me, then it's comfortable for everybody. And that's never been true. And so now we're getting this giant lesson in why that's not true and how it's difficult to sort of sanitize things that happen in your personal life and in your community when you come into work and have to be, you know, dispassionate and professional and cover your identity and, you know, and manage that. It takes a ton of energy and it leaks out our potential as professionals. And so to talk about it is a big step. And I love that you said that, you know, Sandra, like have the conversation as awkwardly, as imperfectly as you need to have it, but also do your work, do your homework before you come to those conversations, and never ask people to do more work because they're already very fatigued and dealing with a lot right now. So this is a time for allies to step forward and really, really dive deep. And, you know, I would say if you have a diversity team or council in your organization, you know, lean on them. But at the same time, again, it's not a question of outsourcing this work to a function, because that function is likely small and not able to scale to a bigger institution. And it's not reasonable or fair to ask for that work to just come from one group of a small group of people for an entire institution. And so leaders in senior executive positions need to really role model the taking of responsibility. And then I would say all of us, whether you're in an impacted community or not, need to really up our learning quotient right now. So Allison, oh yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
No, I was just going to say, Jennifer, to that point, you said earlier, be brave. And I agree. Don't be perfect. Be brave. And don't worry about the perfection part of it.
So true. Be real right now. Don't make perfect the enemy of the good.
That's right.
That's what I always say. And that applies so much to allyship. Allison, so tell us about your leadership in this time. I feel like in many ways, given your background, you were very ready for this. But tell us what that's been like. Have you shifted anything? Have you become more, I don't know, loud? Have you more intentional, like, or you just kind of are you continuing how you've always led at this time? I'm curious.
I think we're fortunate at United Way that we already had a good culture and great core values, and we lead from there, and even use our core values as part of our performance appraisals and performance discussions. So it's embedded. But I think, and I look at John, I mean, you know, he references a little bit of community service a couple years ago for the United Way. He raised nearly $26 million. So I say that because I think leaders like the people you see on this call and probably the people listening want to do something, right? And so the shift I've really had to work at, honestly, is sometimes I just need to be and shut up and listen and, you know, and recognize that. I mean, I gave a speech on diversity topics of the time in 1983, a graduation speech, and I felt a lot smarter then than I do now. Like I think every year that goes by, I realize how little I know and how much I need to listen to other people's experiences. And so I think that's the shift I've tried to make is both just creating safe spaces. We have a mindfulness time that we've been doing over the last couple of years in my office on Friday mornings at 10 o'clock, where we would all just come together and have some quiet time and share if something's on our mind and anybody that wanted to come. But we've been continuing to do that on the phone during the pandemic. And the week of the George Floyd murder, we all just got on that call and cried, you know, together as a staff. And that's hard. You know, that's hard as a leader because you want to fix things. I mean, we're all in these roles because we wanted to lessen suffering and help our companies or our organizations be profitable. So this paradox of being quiet and listening and creating spaces, but also then being personally willing to share and be vulnerable. So we have a newsletter called Wink, What You Need to Know, that goes out each week just internally. And this week, I just wanted to share that when I've dragged my kids to protests and marches from the time they could walk, or sometimes in buggies. And 5 kids we have, my husband and I. And one time I remember my daughter rolling out of bed with her eyes closed, and she said, Mommy, what are we protesting today? So they didn't even always know, but they knew they needed to show up. And last week was really hard for me because my kids told me to stay at the office in case they needed my help. So they went to protest in Greenwood, but they said, Mom, you stay at the United Way office close by in case we need you to come get us, or in case we need you to bail us out of jail, or in case we need you to take us to the hospital. And I shared in my Wink article this week that made me, look at Sandra and look at other friends we have who have to be afraid every time their kids walk out the door just because of the color of their skin. And I shared that in my article to say, if we'll just be still and listen, we can learn those lessons. And then have one of the great things, I think, one of the benefits of working in this pandemic is maybe people have built their empathy muscle a little bit, because many of our donors are now needing help. So maybe if we lean into that empathy a little bit, and also have to be bold and not, I kind of making people feel comfortable in the dominant culture. I mean, I think we all deserve and need to be a little uncomfortable. And somebody said, well, I can see why those folks sitting in those cars would get afraid or impatient and need to just drive on through the crowds. They maybe just were afraid and they were impatient. I'm like, we've been telling African-American people to be patient for 400 years. So maybe we all just need to quit saying that, So those are just a few of the things that we've tried to work on.
So I'm imagining those kids. That's just wonderful that you expose them to that. I don't know if a lot of people that identify as you, me, and you, John, learn those things. What we didn't learn about in school, what we weren't exposed to. Me being LGBTQ and realizing that perhaps the biggest role I can play right now is as an ally, based on the privileges that I have, has been an enormous awakening of the last couple of years. I mean, my question always is, where do I need most to be of service? And it's interesting to have been in a community that is traditionally so marginalized, and yet come through this right now and feel that there are other aspects of my identity that I've been underutilizing, that I need to utilize more. And it's just been a revelation for me. And so you can be simultaneously in certain communities of identity and yet activate all of that allyship too. And we need that, because
Jennifer,
even diverse communities have, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of our unique opportunities right now in Tulsa is we're in the 99th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, which was the most, brutal act against people of American people on American soil, and hundreds of African Americans in our community died on Black Wall Street. And so, we've actively started a year-long learning, launching from that. And I think, just like you said, owning that personal responsibility of recognizing our history to pay better attention in the present to build toward a better future. We're uniquely positioned in Tulsa right now to take advantage of an important time.
Yeah, I learned about the massacre from the show Watchmen on HBO, which starts with a depiction of those riots. But it's really so helpful to realize, and super depressing that has not been taught, along with so much else that hasn't been taught. And that's a piece that's been weighing on my heart very much, because I think we would have more allyship if we were honest about our history, and that more people were exposed to it from an earlier age. It would be obvious what we needed to do and what we needed to fix. Sandra, any comments with anything you'd like to underscore about what Allison shared? Yes.
Yeah, I think what Allison shared was so beautiful, and you're right, Allison. You know, the fact that you worry about your children, my worry for my son, I honestly, and I know to say this is so cliche-ish, but in 2020, I think I worry more now than what my mother used to worry about my brother. It's almost like it's a generation ago. It's like my mother's brothers, my mother's mother may have had to worry about what I'm worrying about today. And so that fear is there, certainly, when we think about our children. But I also want to underscore the importance of allyship. And I used to describe sympathy and empathy like this. If I'm drowning, sympathy says, oh my gosh, look at her, she's drowning. Oh, that's horrible. Oh my goodness. But empathy gets in that water and tries to save me. And I think that that's the important distinction that we need to make today as allies. It's not just you coming alongside, it's you getting in the water with us to save us all. And so that's the one thing that I would underscore about allyship that is so critical today. And yes, this whole process has been exhausting. It has been frustrating. It has made me very angry. I've cried. I've, just yelled. But at the same time, when I look at television and I see young white boys and girls at those rallies, I'm hopeful. And when I see a white boy holding up a sign that says Black Lives Matter, I'm excited because I'm thinking, finally, you're getting in the water and you're helping to save those that are drowning. And I so appreciate it. And it's so needed because we can't do this by ourselves.
No.
And this is not a Black problem. It's not a white problem. It's not an LGBTQ problem. It's a human issue. And as you stated earlier, Jennifer, if we don't all pitch in and do it, we're all going to fail.
That's right. That's right. The role of allies in civil rights, the role of straight allies in winning marriage equality. It's been present in every meaningful change that our society has gone through is that it's a coalition.
That's right.
So, so we have to keep the temperature hot, though. We got to keep the pressure and the urgency on. The temptation to go back to status quo is so strong. And John, I'd love to ask you, how are you keeping the temperature raised? I'm sure you feel the urgency of this moment. So as a leader, I guess, what do you think is most important for you to communicate, and the call to action you're sharing with your maybe executive colleagues? How are you guiding people for what's needed right now? And I'm sure that it's, again, leaving all the kind of room for imperfection because there's no script for a lot of this. This is calling on our deepest recesses as leaders, I think, and exercising some muscles that perhaps we have not developed or that haven't been, I think, kind of accepted in the business world. Things like empathy, transparency, vulnerability, things that we've known have been needed, but that have been, I think, not rewarded and encouraged or demonstrated by so many leaders. So I think that this time is a time for reinvention of what I think effective leadership really looks like. And I personally, long overdue. I'm really excited for that. But how are you calling people to action in your organization so that we keep this door open and we put our foot in the door and we don't let it close for change?
Right. So just a comment on the conversation previously between Allison and Sandra, the race massacre, event. So I, lived in Tulsa for 9 years, now almost 10, and heavily involved in the community. So I'm here for that long. The first time I hear about that, right? So I'm from the East Coast. The first time I hear about that is like a year and a half ago. That was the first time I ever heard about it. I mean, so I think just that speaks volumes for the problem, is that, no one wants to deal with that issue, right? As a society, as a human race, we want to keep all that stuff apart. And so we have to deal with it. We need to deal with it in a peaceful and thoughtful way, but those issues have got to be dealt with. And I think, so for me, that the fact that I don't even hear about it, and I'm heavily involved in the community and the chamber, it just speaks volumes for the problem, right, as a society. Back on kind of the leadership thing, so we're and kind of laugh about it, but our industry, we're in the construction industry, we support energy and industrial markets, and we seem to move from crisis to crisis. So our is in a construction business, so our expertise is dealing with crises. So I think probably the thing I have enjoyed the most is that, we spend a lot of time in our organization on leadership development and, making sure our individuals and our organizations are good leaders, that they have the opportunity to take responsibility for things. And so what's been really exciting for me is to watch our leaders in our organization at all levels step up in this environment. So in the COVID environment and people taking responsibility and stepping up and helping to lead the organization through this, unprecedented event. And so that for me has been, very exciting and very satisfying to see that we've done such a great job with, developing leaders in our organization that they didn't shy away from what the challenge was. So then as it relates to the inclusion and diversity issue, and then we have the issues going on right now, with the protests and those things, and the Black Lives Matters movement, it's come back. As I said, the sheet's been pulled off again, and I think the real risk is on all those things is that it reaches a boiling point, becomes news, and then the news, they move on to something else, and we all go, well, that's over. That's the thing, I think, where we as a society, we can't say that. We can't say, oh, that's over. No, we've got to keep it front and center. In a letter that I've sent to our employees, that we've got to own it, right? I told them I own this, right? This racism in America, I own it, right? And I have to do something about it. And I'm asking all of our employees, you've got to help me do something about it, right? So we got to do, again, I don't have the answers, but I know that I have to own it. It can't just go away because tomorrow is a new day and the media is going to move on to something else. And so we've got to do the things we need to do as an organization, not only in our business, and I think we already do a lot of things for equality, but in our daily lives and our interactions in our communities, we've got to make an impact as a company, because I think that's our great capability, is that we cannot rely on the government to legislate away racism in America. We have to do it as people and as humans. And I think the business community and the leaders in the charitable organizations, we're the ones that have to go make this happen. And so anyway, that's kind of
John, I agree. The leadership of the private sector is so critical, and the workplaces where we used to anyway, spend so much of our waking hours. We're still now on Zooms, but what happens, in our work lives is very much a DE and I question, whether we are the only person of our identity on any team, whether we are feeling microaggressions every day in our work environment, whether we're feeling passed over for promotion and advancement. And, companies have to dig into that. And at the very least, workplaces should be places of belonging. They should be places where, certain groups don't feel there are obstacles to bringing our full selves to work or to having as much opportunity as everybody else. But the playing field isn't level. It's not, right, because institutions are biased at their very core, because they actually are microcosms of our society.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, we've got to literally get in there and say, like, where are the challenges that we've never even really named or looked at before? And let's do the hard, what we call equity work. And equity work is not equality. Equality is a destination. Equity is a strategy, right? It's that. Let's get in there and look at interviewing, recruiting, sourcing talent, promoting people, looking at performance. Right. COVID was already challenging us on a lot of things. And now I feel like we're yet deepening even more into this, like, well, for whom is this not a culture where they feel comfortable to be their full selves? For whom is that true? And then just literally, if we just keep coming back to that question and saying, okay, why is that true? What are the sources of that? We're not going to just Band-Aid it or paper it over. You know, we're not going to just get all the awards and assume that that's all the work that has to happen. You know, we're going to do the harder work, which is the literally like looking at the culture critically.
Right. So we have to, I mean, as a business, you know, this whole remote working thing has caused us to find new channels to communicate just to keep that business moving. And so we're engaging more of our leadership, providing more communication. So communication and education and knowledge transfer is critical for us, our business to continue to operate, but it's critical for us to break this feeling that people can't bring their whole selves to work, right? So if we're setting a good example within our organization that it's okay to bring your full self to work, that we want to hear from everybody, that everybody's a part of the solution in the organization, and we have to continue to say it, we have to live it, we got to communicate it, and because otherwise people just won't be totally sure, they won't completely believe it. And so it's a process. And I think so coming out of this COVID thing, I think we're going to be a better communicator as an organization, and that we have been put into a position where we had to find better channels to communicate. And so we need to take advantage of that new learned skill and those new habits that we've created and use that to drive all the other things we need to do as a business to be sustainable, to improve our IED, to work on environmental issues, to do all those things and use that communication channels that we've created and that we've developed as habits in the last 2 months for reasons.
Yeah, I love that you brought up communication. And I'm viewing it as almost a democratization of input, right? That there's a mutuality to the communication too. And so it's not just one way, but it's literally the level of input that we have possible now, actually, because of the virtual world. It actually, I think in many ways led into the moment we're having right now. So this level of truth telling, this level of input, this level of difficult sharing, but honest input is what's going to make our organizations better. And we were already hearing about that in the COVID context. And now we're hearing about it in another context, right? That there's so much more we can do. And I don't think we can go back to the old ways. We've learned a lot about each other now that feels in the iceberg very much below, way below people's water lines in terms of what have never really brought to work. Whether that's our ethnicity, our mental health issues, whether it's our sexual orientation or true gender identity, you know, there's a now I think a level of sharing that is unavoidable and inescapable because of the way we're working. And so we have to literally see all of each other. And that can be really uncomfortable, particularly if some of us are suffering. So, you know, I think it's painful, but we are looking at each other and truly seeing each other, I think, in a deeper way that we can't forget and we won't forget. I know the leaders on this call won't forget, but, you know, this is going to be what we need to carry forward and not go back to what was before, which I think was in many ways artificial. It was this superficial way of showing up as this is what a leader looks like. And meantime, so much else was going on that we didn't feel we could be transparent about. So Allison and Sandra, I know you have some comments on all of this. Whichever, Allison, we haven't heard from you in a while. What would you say or add on this or anything you'd like to weigh in on?
I think the last thing I would say, you know, to pick up on what John was just sharing, I think that, and you're right, this democratization, that's a great way of putting it. And I think, you know, make sure Sandra has the last word here, but one of the questions that we talked about was, what's a silver lining that may have come through these last few weeks and months for you and your business? And I really struggled with that question because I thought, I don't want in any way to insinuate that any of this is worth any life being lost. Like, you know, we've lost too many people, not just George Floyd, but, you know, so many people in the past few weeks alone, and continue to. And so I don't, you know, when I think about the term silver lining, I don't want it to come across as it was worth death, because it's, you know, I don't want I don't want to get that message out there. But what I do want to say is it feels like a transformational moment. And what John was saying was very wise, I think, is we transformed like that in our workplaces to run, John has employees all over the world and all over the United States. And now he's talking to them like this. He has employees that probably never had a conversation with him that are able to have conversations with him now because we're doing all this on video. And so I think if we can really integrate this transformational and innovative spirit to say, okay, and I said, I feel like a failure in many ways because I've been working in this DEI space since the 80s. Like, what the hell's wrong with me and my generation that we haven't been able to do better, And so maybe this is the moment where we think, we got to do this differently. We not leverage social media. We've got 30,000 donors at the United Way and 1,000 business partner companies and in the Tulsa area and, 59 partner agencies. How do we make sure we're using and leveraging those connections to change the conversation and to do better? And so I think that we can really, what I'm, the main burden and impetus that I carry forward is how do we carry this forward? So this is not just another something on the historical. I know it all leads and builds on each other, but I think it's time to really take a creative and innovative approach to change. And that's what I'm excited about, while I'll be deeply sad about what it's cost us.
Yeah.
It's time to be energized and move forward.
And the older generation, we did what we could. I think we had a limited palette to work with, and now we have social media. We have the white kids at Black Lives Matter March. Like, it's a whole different day, I think, and even the LGBTQ community working on our own issues of racism and transphobia and other phobias that should be inexcusable. And even so it's incumbent on all of us to really take another fresh look at how we've done this work. And we've moved it. We stand on shoulders. And I'm always saying, like, my work as a D&I person stands on so many shoulders, but the way we've done it in the past, like, for example, we never had a word for really allyship. We didn't really do training on that. We just didn't, it was about difference, and it was about, stereotypes and sort of exploding those stereotypes. And that was important at the time, and now we need to change our strategy again. And I know it sounds like everybody on this call like welcomes that opportunity, and maybe to listen generationally. We're not going to have the answers. We have the least number of answers, I think, in the older generations right now, that we need to follow the younger people in terms of the way that they cherish all of who they are and want to bring their full selves to work. I find so inspiring, as somebody who was closeted in the workplace for so long and made up like elaborate lies about who I was, that they aren't willing to compromise. And they've grown up in families like yours, Allison, and all of you are parents, right? Your kids are going to bring so much change. And so I personally can't wait for that. And I feel that generation is going to do something that we could have worked our whole lives to change, and that we may not have been successful, but we did lay the groundwork. And I am proud of that. So yeah, Sandra, would you like to have the last word?
Yeah, so I was going to just say that when Allison said, what have I been doing this whole time? You've been raising the children who are now out there marching, Allison.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so, that's what you've been doing, and so appreciate that. And I would say that, look, we all have to step outside of our comfort zone. And I think part of it, in adding to what John said earlier, is besides the communication, besides the small things that we all can be doing. I mean, we don't all have to be out there marching, as Allison said. Like, some of us have to sit back and pass laws and take people to polls to vote and encourage people to take the census. These are small things that we all can do. And the other thing we can do is get to know people outside of who you are. And I think that goes a long way. Human connection is so easy to fall in love. It's harder to hate up close. And so we've got to get to know each other. And I think that's another way that we can continue to break this cycle and build on what momentum we've already started. the last thing I'll say is last night, and I watch a lot of TV, I watch a lot of different stations, and I heard Laura Coates on CNN, and she said, racism or D&I or equity, let me just say this, I want to quote her correctly, equity is not like eating a pie. And what she shared was, because when I eat a piece of pie, then there's less pie for you. And this is not where we are, and that's not what it is. It is not about replacing you. It is not about me or you. It's about me and you. And I think that that's the piece that we have to start to see. You're not losing by allowing equity. You're actually gaining. And anytime anyone hires someone just because they're Black or brown or because you're trying to meet a diversity metric, and many people have heard me say that, that is not D&I. I don't know what that is, but that's not D&I. And that's not the essence or the spirit in which we're trying to accomplish here when we talk about equity and inclusion. And so I think it's important for us to realize that, and for us all to take whatever privilege we have, whether it's white privilege or whether it's how I grew up or how you grew up, whatever that may be. And we all need to get off our, what one pastor said, God bless it, and do something. And so that's what I would leave us with.
Get off our God bless it. Let's do something. Oh, this has been so enriching, all of you. Sandra, Allison, thank you so much for your time and your hearts today, and your leadership every day. I know that you're making such a difference, and many are watching you and learning from you and in the path that you're walking. And John, I'm looking forward to continuing the Q&A with you and Kuma here. And so we're going to continue, but this was so rich and so helpful.
There you are, Jennifer. Take it away.
Hi, thanks so much. That was amazing to rewatch that. It was fabulous, fabulous. We got so many good questions. The chat was so robust. I hope everybody can stay on for another 12 minutes or so. And we've been trying our best to keep your questions here together. And I've got John, as we said, and then Kuma Roberts, who is Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Tulsa Regional Chamber. So let me make sure I have everybody. Hi, John. Hi, Kuma. You both there?
Hi. Hi.
Hey.
My video's not working. I've been trying to start it. And so.
It's all right. We have your picture.
Yes, you got
Cool.
my picture.
Got your picture. So I would love to ask you both quickly reactions to rewatching that before I get into some of the questions that had come in on chat. So Kuma, let's start with you.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
It was just like sound bites for days. I mean, there's just some really powerful, some very powerful comments. I don't want to start re-quoting all of the wonderful things I said that were said, but I will just say that, I love this idea that it's not a us versus them mentality, that this is work we have to do together. This isn't a Black problem. This isn't a white problem. And so that idea that our community is so tuned into that and so passionate and excited about how we do that work together moving forward is just really inspirational. And to see our leaders like John, who's been just fabulous, and Allison and Sandra, I just can't say enough about the excitement I feel every day to do this work and to do this work with people like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Kuma. Thank you. John.
Probably a couple things. One is I talk too much. Allison is my biggest fan. So $26 million, her team does all the heavy lifting. We're just the campaign chairs are just face candy. So, but they do all the hard work. But no, I think, again, a couple of things stuck out for me from Sandra, again, was this concept of leave space for grace. I think is really, really important on how we have these difficult dialogues and by both the asker and the questioner, and the answerer and the questioner. And then her description of sympathy and empathy, I thought was really powerful. So it was kind of things went back through, and when I re-listened to all that, a couple of the things that I really kind of picked up and liked in that.
Thank you, John. So this recording we all just watched was recorded June 5th, and I want to put a placeholder in that because yet more things have happened since then. Unbelievably, but not a surprise to a lot of us, I think, who've come to expect continued videos to come out, even though we're doing the work. This is going to be a long time to fix. And the other thing I want to raise, and Kum, I'd love your thoughts on this, is you have a big rally happening on Saturday. And I know this is an uncomfortable, my thoughts will be with Tulsa on Saturday. And I wondered, what does this bring up for the community? And I guess, how do you help organizations and leaders and employees feel safe when things like this are so present physically? Yeah, just what are your thoughts about navigating that? How should we be understanding that right now?
Yeah, it's a tense place, just aside from, the rally and sort of, two different sort of, maybe ideals that are just sort of clashing, that are going to be kind of converging on Tulsa. It is not unlike what I must imagine was felt 100 years ago, back 99 years ago, as we sort of experienced the race massacre. It feels like there is a culmination of events occurring in Tulsa and convening here. And so I think that there's a kind of a tagline going around that it's a movement and not a moment. And I think that this idea that we are in the midst of a movement has been really fascinating. And to see, like I said, Tulsa's pulling together. We're celebrating Juneteenth, right? The day of African-American freedom. And so I think I've seen us pulling together, mobilizing to unite against hate and hateful rhetoric. And although, yes, having President join us in our city is an honor and should be an honor, I think we have to recognize that that we want to abolish hate, that we want to convene together and unite together against it and hateful rhetoric. And so those things can't be debated in my mind. And as long as you're with me, that my freedom and all of that is not tied to your being my oppressor, then I'm all for what we can do together. And so I just choose not to focus on perhaps leadership that isn't saying or doing the things that we need to hear. The people are doing enough of that and giving and feeding me to do the right thing. And so I'm going to be celebrating, I'll tell you that, in all the best ways with my people and with my community.
I love that reframe. It's so true. I think we've got to pay attention to the larger movement that's occurring.
Absolutely.
And just keep our eyes on the prize. And this is so true that we have to, there's just a lot of noise right now that is distracting for those of us who think we're fighting the right battle by like duking it out on Facebook with people.
Right.
It's not like that. You may feel like you're activating your allyship, but I might ask, this work is long and it needs to be with a systems lens. And so, those one-on-ones are important, but don't exhaust yourself doing that when we have to be asking the more systems questions about like, how do we get here? Why is it that way? And then also celebrating, like you said, the sort of massiveness of this movement. I mean, it is here to stay. I live in New York City. There are many, many marches every day, multiple places in the city. It's been incredible to watch and to be here right in the epicenter of all of it and watch it evolve and just find its voice, which is now solid and huge and grounded and consistent, and it's lasting, so this is a really cool thing to see. So there's a couple other questions, and I know we don't have any time at all. There are a couple of questions about dealing with conflict amongst loved ones right now, disagreeing in our family units. I know that this has, I've been through this myself ever since the election of 2016, honestly, just feeling like things were tenuous amongst loved ones that had different viewpoints. So I just wondered if, I know there's a lot of pain for people. This could be coworkers as well, and also family members, church communities, education systems. Anywhere where we're really feeling a disconnect from those in terms of understanding and empathy. Do you all have any words of wisdom for that?
I think in my immediate family, my wife and I and our two kids we have 4 different opinions. So, and a lot of those opinions cross over. And so even within the family, it's challenging to have those difficult conversations. But, you know, and probably, you know, my daughter might be with her opinion, which is great because I think she challenges certainly myself and my son to really think through a lot of the topics out there. And but we're aligned on a lot of the things, you know. But just I think for me is what I think about is, so even within my immediate family, challenging to have some of the conversations that need to happen, how difficult it has to be with people that you barely know, right? With somebody that you might be in a peace march with that is peaceful, but even having a discussion with someone who's on the other side of that topic that you don't know makes those conversations very, very difficult. So I think events like this today, and the more of these that we can have, where we can have conversations where we can feel okay to talk about issues, to ask questions, where we can have space for grace, I think is huge to try and move the ball forward on this issue.
Mm-hmm. And I would say just lead with learning. You know, I've been involved and had a lot of people ask, you know, hey, they've got family members who have opposing views or want to know more. And I appreciate that at least I'm happy to talk with anyone and try to engage in compromise or try to engage in different perspective viewing when it's met with their leading with learning, when they want to learn more. And so I embrace every opportunity to do that, and have a dear friend reached out to me on Sunday and said, I'd like to pull together you and some of my grandma and my uncle and some people, and we just need to talk. And do you mind if they ask you some challenging questions? And can I create a safe space? And would you mind being that person for me, that person of color, that Black person? And I said, sure, because it was like a space for learning. And yes, there were some questions that I answer, and in my heart I kind of thought, oh my gosh, aren't we beyond this already? But there was a genuine desire to know more and learn, and I was happy to do that. So when that exists between two people, I think there's much that can be done. And again, this is about respecting who I am, you know, my skin color included. And I just don't think that should be debated. I respect everyone for who they are, what they bring to the table. And as long as we can start with that, I think anything else can be overcome. So that's how I feel about it.
So good.
Jennifer, I'd kind of add, well, Kuma and I are not related, but she shared, we were talking about family. So, we were in the Mark event together in December, and Kuma, along with some other people, shared some personal stories about how they were impacted by racial inequities in Tulsa. And that was very powerful for me. I've retold Kuma's story to at least a dozen people since then. And, you know, as a way to hopefully get people to appreciate what the issues are that Black people are facing in our community, our small community in Tulsa. You know, we have racial issues here, and people don't, you know, they just not awake to it. And so for me, having that being in a safe place to have that conversation with Kuma and like Phil Armstrong and others, and then be able to take those conversations and use those in my dialogue outside of that event in private settings, I think is very, very huge on getting the message out.
Thank you so much, John. Well, I know we've got to wrap up, and I hate to do it. This has just been a rich hour and a half, incredible day. Thank you, Kuma and John. And